U.S. President Donald Trump has warned Iran that the U.S. will take very strong action if the regime executes protesters. Rights groups say thousands of people have been arrested since mass protests erupted some 3 weeks ago. One demonstrator, reported to be in government custody, is 26-year-old Erfan Soltani, who was detained just last week. His family says he may be executed today. Rights groups say more than 2,500 people have been killed in the protests. Iran has threatened to strike American military bases in the Middle East if Washington intervenes on behalf of the demonstrators. A likely target for the U.S. would be the Revolutionary Guard, Iran's elite military force.
As protests rage across Iran, a Kurdish activist tells DW exclusively that the elite Revolutionary Guard has fanned out throughout the country, stopping vehicles, searching mobile phones, stoking more resentment against the regime and its security forces. The Guards are estimated to number between 150,000 and 200,000 active personnel. They have their own army, navy, and air force, a parallel military whose official role is to protect the legacy of the Islamic Revolution of 1979. They're led by Mohammad Pakpour, who reports directly to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, bypassing the government and president. The Guards are largely insulated from the economic pressures felt by Iranians, due to their control over defense, oil and gas, construction and telecommunications concerns worth billions of dollars, while ordinary Iranians suffer under sanctions, fueling more resentment against the Guards and the theocratic regime. The Guards have also dealt with Iran's proxy forces in the Middle East, the so-called Axis of Resistance, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and Houthi rebels in Yemen. Multiple countries have labeled the Revolutionary Guards a terrorist organization. This has made them a prime target in recent years. In 2020, a U.S. airstrike took out the head of the Al-Quds Force, an elite unit within the Guards. And last summer, Israeli airstrikes killed much of the Guard's senior leadership. Despite those losses and significant damage done to its proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, the Revolutionary Guards have maintained their position. Their closeness to the supreme leader makes them indispensable to the regime and makes them a priority target for any international intervention.
Let's bring in Saeid Golkar here. He's an Iranian-American political scientist who teaches at the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga in the U.S. He joins me from there. Saeid, tell us more about the Revolutionary Guard and what's at stake for them in this uprising.
Revolutionary Guard, created in 1979 as a small militia, gradually expanded to the huge military and, later on to the state in a state. Revolutionary Guard, as the videos out, has, economic branches, cultural branches, media, TV, the security, intelligence. They are a state in a state. And that's why, the falling of the Islamic Republic is the falling of the IRGCs. They are the same. They are the clergy and the IRGC are the two sides of the one coin. And that's why they believe that the dismantling of the Islamic Republic is the end of the IRGC. They are fighting for themselves.
If the theocratic regime in Iran were to fall, could members of the Revolutionary Guard, given how powerful you just described them as being, could they end up filling the power vacuum?
The possibility is there if the Islamic Republic, if the Ayatollah Khamenei have been killed or taken out, and there is no translation, the IRGC are powerful to take the position. But if the attack with the Ayatollah Khamenei and the IRGC high-rank commander continue, then we will have a transition. You have to remember, when we talk about the IRGC has about 180,000 personnel, from the rank to file. For us, this council of commandership of the IRGC is important. About 1,000 of the high-rank commander that we have to think and we have to take care of. Other than that, most of these people are the Iranian from different, social classes, from the belong to the different ethnicities, and that they can actually incorporate it with the Iran army later on.
So just to clarify for our viewers, the IRGC being the Iranian Revolutionary, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now, these protests started... Go ahead.
sorry to clarify, is actually is Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. There is no name of
Exactly.
Iran in their mandate or even in their charter.
Right. Okay. So now this protest movement started over the collapsing economy, but the protests seem to be morphing into something larger in Iran. What do you see as the main source of anger and discontent driving these protests?
We have to remember this protest is not an isolated phenomenon. You know, from 1979, as the Islamic Republic took the power, there have been several waves of the protests. Before that was Mahsa Amini protest from 2022. Before that, it was 2019 November protest that the Islamic Republic killed 1,500 people in 2 days, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of wave of the protests for different reasons. Islamic Republic is a theocratic security regime, very politically repressive, culturally and socially stagnated. Economically, they are very incompetent. There are a lot of grievances. People have the complaint about water scarcity, electricity, air pollution, a very bad economic situation. So there are a lot of grievances. The trigger was economy, but all of this structural cause accumulated for the last 5 decades has led to the Iranian from different social classes, different groups come to the street and protest Islamic Republic. They don't want anymore to reform the system, unlike 2 decades before. They just want to change the system because they realize this system is not able to provide even the basic need for the Iranian.
So the people are really unhappy that they're not having basic services provided. The regime, though, claims it has a handle on the uprising. Is that your impression? Briefly, if you can.
Very clearly, when you shut down the internet, one of the reasons that you are doing it is trying to hide the atrocity and crime against humanity by killing at least 12,000 people. But at the same time, it shows that you are very insecure. You don't want any information goes out. You don't want people to understand what is happening in Iran. Islamic Republic is in the weakest moment of its histories. At the beginning, there was a news that Iran warned the United States, if you attack us, we are coming back. But you have to remember, when the United States took off Qasem Soleimani, the second man in Iran did nothing. When the United States bombarded Iran and destroyed Iran nuclear facilities 6 months ago, Iran did nothing. And you just can't imagine 6 months later, when they are very weak, this is just barking on the tree without any action.
Saeid, thank you very much for speaking with us today. That was Iranian-American political scientist Saeid Golkar.
It's a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
And Farzan Sabet is an Iran expert at the Global Governance Center in Geneva. Joins me now. How big a role does Iran's Revolutionary Guard play in clamping down on this protest?
Well, thanks for having me here, Sarah. Of course, they play a massive role. They're the leading security institution in Iran, possessing not only military elements, but also security elements. Throughout all of Iran's provinces, as well as bigger security regions, the Revolutionary Guards have headquarters, which are used as centers to coordinate their response for the crackdown on protesters, including both intelligence as well as suppression on the ground. And in terms of who's doing a lot of the actual killing, I believe your report mentioned the 2,000 dead figure. We have some estimates that are much higher, potentially as high as 12,000, although that remains unconfirmed. Well, many of the individuals and security forces that will be committing those massacres and those killings will be the forces of the Revolutionary Guard, including full personnel of the guards themselves, as well as components of the besieged paramilitary element. We have footage of from the protests or on the ground doing a lot of the killing.
Anger is clearly boiling over in Iran among the Iranian population. Tell us a little bit more about this background on this anger toward both the regime and the Revolutionary Guard, because on the face of it, this uprising has been about economic inequality and years of stagnation. Is it also more than that?
Of course, absolutely it is. One thing I see, which I think is a bit of a misnomer for the media, is that these are presented as economic protests. But going back to December 2017, which was the first of 4 of these major anti-regime protests, what we see is that there will be a trigger. It could be cuts in subsidies, it could be inflation, it could be the killing of a young Kurdish Iranian girl over the issue of mandatory hijab in police custody. But what immediately happens is that the protests, whether they start relating to one issue, immediately explode and call for the downfall of the regime. What I think that points to is a systemic and cyclical crisis of domestic political legitimacy, because many Iranians now believe that the Islamic Republic can no longer solve their issues. A part of the kind of revolution's original social contract was, for example, the kind of economic benefits and better economic conditions, bringing the oil wealth of the country to the people's table. But obviously, between sanctions and the regime's mismanagement and corruption, people are no longer seeing that and are dealing with much harsher economic conditions.
Amid this environment where resentment has been building against the clerics, there have been several waves, as you mentioned there, of protest over the years that Iranian authorities have ultimately, they have stamped it out. Force has proved effective in the past. Is something different this time?
That's absolutely true that force has proved effective in the past. But what we have to keep in mind is that we've had 4 of these protests in 8 years. So averaging 1 every 2 years, which again demonstrates that they're cyclical. And unless something major changes, they will keep happening until something gives. In terms of these protests in particular, we see it continue in terms of the trend of these protests, which is that since the first of these protests in December 2017, that they have grown over time larger. They've increased in terms of their geographical scope across the country, and they've become each time more threatening to the system, even if they've been eventually stamped out. I think 2 characteristics to keep in mind that I think are unique about this round of protests is that in the past, no clear leadership figure had emerged, and so many Iranians were hesitant to go out on the streets. But ahead of the Thursday, when some of the biggest protests that we've seen yet began, what I started to hear from Iranians, both in the diaspora but also inside of Iran, was that now they felt in the figure of Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi and the broader Pahlavi movement that there was a potential alternative. And so if their choice was between an Islamic Republic, which was essentially giving them a slow death, or a chance to overthrow the system and have an alternative leadership, which could potentially provide a more positive horizon for the future, then many people, especially those who went on the streets, basically decided to go for that alternative. And we saw that reflected in the large number of chants. One other thing I'll say is that the potential for, either moderate to large scale foreign military intervention was not there in the past. And I think that's something that sets this apart as well.
Okay, and apologies, I was just signaling to my producer that I want to ask you one more question. Reason being, that was very interesting what you were saying, describing now, rallying behind a potential alternate figure. Talk with us also a little bit more about the external pressure, because the U.S. is now ramping up its threats against Iran, with President Trump saying help is on the way. What do you potentially foresee happening on that front? What are the options there? What could now change the outcome, that it's been in the past, that the protest movements have simply been stamped out?
Of course. So in terms of the options, we've already seen one option deployed, which was secondary tariffs. Now, we have to look closely at the executive order that comes out of it and how it's implemented. But this begins a process of increasing pressure on the Islamic Republic and on the country as a whole through economic pressure. A second form of intervention, which we're either already seeing or which could come in the future, is cyber measures. For example, attacking state media, which is being used to instill terror in the population by showing, for example, images and videos of the large number of dead. And of course, we could have an important, let's say, one-off symbolic strike, which could take out an important target, for example, senior leadership figures or facilities used for repression. And depending on how President Trump conceives of this, it could also be part of a longer campaign, which begins with any of these elements, but continues over time. Again, specifically targeting the domestic apparatus of repression against Iranians.
Farzan Sabet of the Global Governance Center in Geneva, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
For more on this, we can speak now with Rojin Mukriyan. She teaches political theory at University College Cork in Ireland, and her work focuses on Iran. She joins us from Cork. Rojin, tell us more about the Revolutionary Guard and its role in trying to suppress this uprising.
Thank you for having me on. Well, I think the first point here to make is that what has guaranteed the regime survival in Iran is the existence of its repressive and security apparatus, namely IRGC. But IRGC is not a conventional army. IRGC is an ideological military forces, very loyal to the Islamic establishment and based on the Article 150 of the Islamic Republic of Iran's constitution. The IRGC is the guardian of the theocratic revolution. So their task based on the constitution is to preserve and protect the Islamic revolution inside and beyond the Iranian borders. And they are directly responding to the decisions of the Supreme Leader. So when on January 3rd, the Supreme Leader Khamenei comes out and says that the rioters must be put in their place, this is a direct order to the IRGC to go out and eliminate protesters. But the IRGC is not just the military forces, as your report also indicated. Over the years, they become the state's mega contractor. They have monopoly over the large segment of the Iranian economy. They control oil revenue, they control telecommunication, energy, banks, and also state-owned supermarkets in Iran. And also, they now become influential policymakers within the Iranian politics. So it is not exaggeration to say that the existence of the IRGC is tantamount to the existence of the Islamic Republic.
These protests started over the collapsing economy, which, as you just point out, the Revolutionary Guard controls much of. But these protests seem to be morphing into something much larger. How do you explain this outpouring of anger and discontent among the Iranian people?
To simply put it, people have no reason to support the Islamic Republic anymore. Yes, it was started in Bazar because of economic collapse of the regime, but soon it moved and quickly turned to something bigger. Their protesters calling for end of the regime. The Islamic Republic suffers not only from economic crisis. It is engulfed by crisis, including political crisis. Lost its legitimacy. The Iranian regime cannot even produce enough electricity or even gas for domestic consumptions, considering that the Iranian state sits on very large natural resources, including oil and gas. When it comes to politics, we see that over the years, Iran's wrong foreign policy brought a huge economic sanctions, and all fell. Like Iran created proxy. Over the years, they spent like $700 million dollar every year on Hezbollah and Hamas. They spent $100 billion on nuclear program, and all of this severely damaged. Now, what the protesters demand is the end of the regime. It's a political demand that they want, and that's the end of this regime.
Rojin, thank you very much for talking with us again today. That was Iran expert Rojin Mukriyan from University College Cork.
Thank you so much.